Welcome back to Kings of the North. Bill Landis. Isn't it great to be back? Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis here. We're so happy to be here talking about football. I am in Ohio. Bill Landis, you are in a desert. I'm not sure which desert it is, but you are on site for Ohio State and Missouri in the Cotton Bowl. But we are here to break down the college football playoff semifinals. This is the first breakdown show. This is Bama, Michigan in the Rose Bowl. We will come back with a separate show on Washington, Texas. But again, we've been a little scattered with our schedule, and it's just great to be back talking ball.
Yeah, it is. I was, when we had to move some things around, I was a little worried we weren't going to be able to preview these semifinal games. So I'm glad we found some time here to squeeze them in before January 1st.
So we are of the North. People know this by now. So we are going to attack this, Bill, as we break down the four different aspects of this Michigan-Alabama game from the side of like, why can't Michigan win this? Like, what would prevent Michigan, who's a 1.5 favorite? It's basically a toss-up game. Just think of it as a toss-up game. Michigan, the 1 seed, Alabama, the 4 seed. Like, what would stop this from happening? And the thing about this is, if we had this conversation, Bill, I think anytime before right now, I feel like the list of the things that would prevent Michigan from winning this game would be perhaps quite long.
Yes. You mean like before this year or before
this year? Yes, before this version of Michigan and this version of Alabama, because the whole point with this version of Michigan is that they've been good in the North, but can they take it out in the world against the best of the SEC? And previous to this year, I don't know that there would have been a lot of reason to have faith in that idea.
No, I mean, especially with what we saw the kind of the first time Jim Harbaugh has had to do this against an SEC team against Georgia, did not go very well. They're 0-2 in the playoff games. We'll talk more about that. But yeah, it's Nick Saban in Alabama. Like it takes a lot, I think, for anybody to feel confident or even reasonably confident that a team could find a way to beat them. And for a long time, Michigan and basically everyone in the North who's not Ohio State just weren't positioned to do that. But now it does feel like it's flipped a little bit.
So all-time, Bama leads the series here against Michigan 3-2. Michigan won in the Hall of Fame Bowl on January 2nd, 1988, so after the 87 season, and Michigan won in the Orange Bowl on January 1st, 2000. So, and that was 35-34. That was a good game. So like it's 4 of the 5 matchups. This will be the 6. 5 of the 6 are in bowl games. 1, they played a like preseason, or not preseason, but like, neutral site kind of thing in Dallas, in this stadium in 2012, and Alabama took Michigan apart. And that's the game that kind of sticks in my head, Bill. Also, the most recent matchup, January 1st, 2020, after the 2019 season, Citrus Bowl 35-16. Alabama takes Michigan apart. Like, those are the things when you think head to head, it's like, wow, I mean, like, it's nice. It's pleasant for Michigan to go play these games, but they couldn't compete. They couldn't compete.
And honestly, if it's kind of odd that we're in a position where it does feel like that's drastically different, and I do believe it is, but it's not like Michigan has suddenly recruited better or even close to the same level as Alabama. And it's not. I'm not saying it to take anything away from Michigan, because I think Michigan has improved itself across the board, but also this is lesser version of Alabama. This is not Nick Saban's best team, certainly.
True or false? This is a true or false question. The 2 best teams in the Big Ten this year were better than the 2 best teams in the SEC.
I'd buy that.
So this is what we have to get past, because in conclusion, I'm going to drop it in conclusion 4 minutes in. In conclusion, there's nothing stopping Michigan from winning this game. There is nothing. I don't think there's anything where you say, well, Michigan has no answer for that.
Right.
And in the history of the playoff, in this modern history of the SEC, which again, the modern history of the SEC is birthed when Florida beats Ohio State in the national championship game 41-14 at the end of the 2006 season. Since then, there often are reasons when anyone goes and plays the best of the SEC. This is the SEC champ, where there's just no answers. This is not that Bama team. And this is not that Michigan team. This is the best of Michigan. This is not the best of Bama. And that's what makes this a toss-up.
Yeah, there's nothing. I mean, there are stress points, and we're going to talk about them. Things that Michigan has to be on point with, but there's nothing that feels insurmountable. No advantage or perceived advantage for Alabama that is so stark that you just think Michigan has no chance to counter it. And honestly, if you break it down, I think Michigan might have some more advantages than Alabama has going into this game. So there's like unique stuff. There's stuff in this game that Michigan has not seen this year, which we'll get into. But I don't know that that's necessarily things that Michigan can't handle.
There's a guy that Michigan
there's
has.
There's a dude.
There is a guy, and we'll start with that. So let's start with the offensive side of the ball for Alabama against the Michigan defense. This is not a great Alabama offense. This is not a high-flying, high-scoring, racking up points. This is not a consistent Alabama offense at all. It is not. It is an explosive Alabama offense. But this game probably is played in the 20s, but I mean, Alabama is like 60th or something in the country in points per game. This is not a dominant Alabama offense, which again, sort of at the beginning of Saban's tenure, it was all defense and they played average quarterbacks and they were fine. They've certainly gotten much better on offense, but this offense for Alabama is it's hard to put your finger on in some ways.
It is. I think there's been definite improvement for Alabama's offense from the beginning of the year until now, and they've figured out, I think, how to utilize Jalen Milroe in the most effective way possible. But it's not like they went from a merely functional offense to, oh boy, look out, this team can blow the doors off of anybody. I think they went from like awful in a really bad way to now like functional with some intriguing upside. But I think it's not. We've seen some really kind of like high-powered offenses win national titles the last couple of years. Like even Georgia like went about it a different way, but there was some stuff on that offense I think that like scared you, and there was balance and there was efficiency. Alabama feels a little boom or bust. Now the boom is quite good, and if they do it, it's hard to handle. But it's been a little bit of an up and down season, I think, for this offense and the coordinator Tommy Rees.
Yeah. Yeah. So and the boom is a boom guy. So they are 21st in efficiency and offense. They are 50th in sort of like that EPA, that's sort of like a success rate kind of things. Again, this is all explosive. It is not a down after down. That's the great contrast here. Michigan is all about being a down after down successful offense, and Alabama isn't about that at all. Alabama is everything through the roof. They are 20th in the Power 5 in success rate offensively. Alabama is. They are 5th in the Power 5 in explosiveness. So this, I mean, you're looking at the stats here, 35 points per game. They really put against anybody good, they're in the 20s. Michigan only gives up like 10 points a game. Michigan's a top 10 defense. Do you have any dispute? However you want to cut it up, Michigan's a top 10 defense, maybe top 5.
I think I say top 10. Like it's hard with the way that the Big Ten has played offense, but the couple of good offenses that Michigan did face, it looked similar to how it looked in every other game. So I think they're comfortably top 10.
The thing I like about Michigan's defense in this matchup is that I think Michigan 1 through 11 is very strong. There's not a lot of weak links. I don't know that they have game wreckers that you maybe would find on other teams, but when I was just rewatching games, Bama in its last 2 games against Auburn and Georgia, there were both breakdowns in coverage that just is like, how did that happen? Yeah. Like deep balls where the corner lets the guy go and the safety doesn't come over, and you just give Jalen Milroe and Jermaine Burton a 65-yard bomb at the end of the first half for no reason. Just like a little bit of a motion and a wheel route where guys get picked off and a guy's what. I just feel, honestly, we have to remember, this is a thing you must remember in this breakdown. SEC incompetence. And people don't like to talk about it. They don't acknowledge that. You watch Bama at the end of the year. Teams are just screwing up against them. And the screw-up factor for Michigan defensively, I feel like is pretty low. The game wreck factor might not be high, but actually against this Alabama offense, I think you'd rather have a defense that doesn't screw stuff up and make Alabama beat you. And if you don't have Aiden Hutchinson, okay, just 1 through 11, don't give Bama free points.
Yeah, they don't have a guy. I mean, at least from what I've seen, that you can like isolate and attack consistently, and I guess neither does Alabama. We'll talk about that, but yeah, no, I think you're right, and I think it's an interesting philosophical question. Like, what would you rather be, like a team that sells out and like tries to create havoc? And Michigan creates a decent amount of havoc. It's not like they don't create any, but it's not like aggression and living in your backfield is not necessarily their calling card. It's more about just like being solid. They're really well coached. Like I know a lot of what Michigan has done this year has sort of been clouded by the Connor Stallion stuff, but I actually do think Jesse Minter is a really good defensive coordinator and runs a rather sophisticated defense for college football, and maybe doesn't get enough credit for that. And like the Michigan guys just like sort of understand the system to a T, which makes it really hard, I think, to get broken plays against them.
All right, this gets specifically to the pass game. Alabama throwing it and Michigan defending the pass. And here's the thing. I'm going to give you Alabama's 3 leading receivers in the pass game, okay? First is Jermaine Burton. He has 35 catches for 777 yards. Next is Isaiah Bond. He has 44 catches for 621 yards. And third is Jalen Milroe, who has 50 scrambles for 479 yards. You have to talk his scrambling. He is the pass game. They don't have a receiver that scares anybody. They used to have that. They have not had that. In when you look at all their other playoff teams, they had receivers that scared you. In 2021, when they played Georgia for the national championship game, they had Jamison Williams, who was a 1,500-yard receiver. Now he was hurt by the end of the year, and John Mechie was also hurt by the end of the year, but he was an 1,100-yard receiver. But that season, right, when it felt like Bryce Young often, this officially, we are in year 3 of the quarterback save us Alabama offense.
Yes.
They throw nothing in rhythm. I counted 6 completions in the Georgia game that were in rhythm, actual make a read, throw to a guy like you're supposed to. Nobody holds the ball like Jalen Milroe holds the ball. It is unbelievable. I have an unbelievable stat that will blow your mind. But the receiving core, I don't think there's anybody that scares you. And I think especially when you think about the cover guys for Michigan and Will Johnson, who it seems like should be healthy after getting hurt and missing the Big Ten championship game, that should be fine. Josh Wallace, Mike Sanders, who we love, good safeties. I like Michigan's chances of staying with these okay Alabama receivers.
No, I do too. I think there's been times throughout the year where Isaiah Bond looks like pretty special, but it's not been his entire season. Like Jermaine Burton, is a nice receiver, but yeah. I don't think anything that scares you. And like Michigan has played Ohio State, so they're not going to go out there in the Rose Bowl and like see something they haven't seen before when they line up across from Alabama's receivers. It's all about the scramble factor. And like Jalen Milroe will run around back there and try to throw the ball down the field. He's not necessarily always looking to run after he gets off his first or second read, although he usually is. So like that's difficult for any defensive back. I don't care how good you are or how good the receivers are. If you're asked to cover a guy for 6 seconds, that's really challenging. So that'll be a different test for Michigan, just based off what it's seen in the Big Ten this year, and didn't really see much of what they're going to see from Jalen Milroe in the non-conference either. But if you're just talking purely outside skill versus secondary talent, I think Michigan has the edge there for sure.
The best offense that Michigan has played this year so far is Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
True or false? If we were drafting the best skill players from Alabama and Ohio State, and let's assume everybody's healthy, would the first 4 picks be Marvin Harrison Jr., Travion Henderson, Emeka Buka, and Cade Stover? 4 Ohio State players before you would take any Alabama players.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Like, we just try to contextualize like what we are talking about here. This is not a special Alabama skill group, and it hasn't been for a couple years. Again, their playoff teams, Devontae Smith won the Heisman in 2020, 1,800 receiving yards, Jerry Jeudy, Calvin Ridley, Amari Cooper, right? Like that's not what this is, throwing the ball. But Milroe holding the ball, hold. He has 479 yards off scrambles this year. That's second in the Power 5 behind only Jaden Daniels. He only has 214 rushing yards on called runs. That's 31st in the Power 5 among quarterbacks. So he's not that dangerous. If you get him a lane outside on the zone read, he'll hit it. But if the hole's not there right away, you can get him to bounce right and then track him down a little bit. It's all about the scrambles. Hold. Here's my stat. Crazy plays. This is my crazy play. We got to invent stats on Kings of the North. We're going to invent stats. I promise we're going to invent stats. This is my crazy play stat. This is combining scrambles, big time throws, according to PFF, which are just like sort of, one when you see it, right? And sacks. Okay. So percentage of dropbacks for Jalen Milroe that ends with either a scramble, a sack, or a big time throw. Do you want to guess like what his percentage is? I'm going to give you a number to base it off of. Okay. JJ McCarthy for Michigan. The percent of the time when he drops back that it ends with either a sack, a scramble, or a big time throw is 16.7% of the time combined, those three. What do you think Jalen Milroe is?
Like much higher. I would say like 68%.
Oh, that's too high. 34.8, okay. But a third of the time, more than a third of the time, 34.8%, more than double JJ McCarthy. Okay. So more than a third of the time when Jalen Milroe just drops back to pass, it's either going to be a sack, a scramble, and he's the second best scrambler in college football, or a ridiculous throw. That's crazy.
That's pretty
There's
crazy.
nothing normal. There's nothing normal here. I think if Alabama had Kyle McCord, they would have gone 8-4 this year. And that is not a shot at Kyle McCord. It's their reliance on a quarterback who can do things on his own. So when they put in, it was like, well, Jalen Milroe threw a bunch of picks against Texas. I don't know about this. And they put in Tyler Buckner. It's like, okay, it's a non-functional offense if you don't have a maestro of creativity with the ball in his hands, because they don't do anything in rhythm. They don't get open. They don't die. Tommy Reese, they don't even need an offensive coordinator. Just drop back, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and then see what's up. That's their whole offense. So that makes, I think, we can just stop the show. That makes this game impossible to diagnose because I have no idea. Because it's going to come down to Jalen Milroe doing what Jalen Milroe does. Now, against Auburn did not spy him. He ran for 100 yards. Georgia spied him with 2 guys much of the game. He ran for 29 yards, and he had a 30-yard run. So his other 13 runs in that game were for negative yards combined. And then there are these broken plays, these big plays. He's going to take 3-4 deep shots a game at least. But it's a wild experience, brother. But I think a Michigan defense that does what it is supposed to do and doesn't have a weak link, I think that's the kind of defense I would want to take into a game against a quarterback like this.
It definitely is. I guess the one thing I question with it is just the speed of Michigan's defense to actually like run with Jalen Milroe, to track him down, to keep him from actually getting the corner on some of the stuff that you're talking about. Like, and it's not that I don't think Michigan lacks defensive speed. I think it's just hard to get a true idea of what exactly that looks like when they're playing, some slower offenses in the Big Ten. It's not that Jalen Milroe is merely like a willing runner and like a good runner, like kind of shifty. He's so fast. He might be the fastest quarterback I've ever seen when he gets into the open field.
Yeah, no, he's absolutely devastating, but he'll also take sacks. Now he took a bunch of sacks early in the year. He has not taken as many sacks lately. Part of that is because Caden Proctor, they're a freshman left tackle, an Iowa guy that Ohio State did not get in on, was going to go to Iowa, flipped Alabama, starts at left tackle as a true freshman. He was really bad at the beginning of the year. He's gotten much, much, much better.
Yes.
He is Caden Proctor, again, this is part of the pass game. He is 5th in the Power 5 in the number of sacks that he's given up as a tackle. But again, that's like, it's all in the first 2/3 of the season. So If Michigan can get some pressure though, and like hem Milroe in, he will take sacks. But that's going to be, I think they don't have, I don't know that Michigan has anybody coming off the edge that's just going to win one-on-one battles. But if Jesse Minter can be creative and try to get some pressure that way, Milroe will hold the ball and take sacks for sure.
And I don't even know. It might be a game where this is probably not the right way to put it, but like, do you want to win those battles? Do you actually want to pressure Jalen Milroe, or do you want to just kind of close it in on him and try to contain him and keep him in the pocket? I think he's like a 50% passer from a clean pocket. It's just he's not comfortable doing it. He's not comfortable reading out a defense. And I actually think that it might sound counterintuitive to say, like, don't go after the quarterback because that's when he's going to kill you. But I actually think that's probably the plan here, whether that's playing contain on the edges with your defensive ends or spying the way we saw Georgia spy. It's probably some combination of both, to be honest. But I don't think you want to be flying up the field trying to get to Jalen Milroe, which might actually work or play into Michigan's hands because it's not a defense that just has guys coming screaming off the edge at you all the time.
Tough part of that is if you sit and you could see plays where drop 8 in a zone and then he sit, and then eventually somebody comes open in that zone.
Yeah.
Because you can't cover for that long. But again, I think the competence level of Michigan to do that might even be higher than Georgia. Like I think it's such a cohesive, tightly fit defense that knows what it's supposed to do. Can anybody cover for 8 seconds when Jalen Milroe is just sitting? No. But I like Michigan's chances as much as anybody. So again, sometimes I think it would be frustrating for those SEC defenses to sit. There's nothing there, and then somebody comes open finally. But again, if it's Mike Sanders still back there, I like his chances of like, okay, he's not going to let that happen. So I just, in the end, it's a lot on Jesse Minter's plan, but he's had a month to study this, right? I mean, this is, and again, like Milroe was not great against Georgia. He was not. He saved them against Auburn with, again, a ridiculous play where Auburn on 4th and 31 drops 9 guys. Actually, they dropped 8 because they rushed 2 and had a spy. They drop 8, but yet they wind up with one-on-one coverage in the back of the end zone on Alabama's best receiver, which is just incompetence. In that exact situation, I don't think Michigan would have done that. And if they had played a more competent defense in that moment, Alabama would have lost that game and wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
He's crazy though. It's unbelievable.
He's fun to watch, right? Did you enjoy watching him?
I like quarterbacks who hold the ball.
Yeah.
I was having Justin Fields flashbacks. Hold, belief. Every second you hold the ball is 10% more belief in yourself. Yeah. And again, sometimes he has too much because then sometimes it's like, okay, well, that was 9 seconds and then you got sacked. And I don't really know what you were thinking there because that was pretty ridiculous. So there is a part of that. So again, in the end, Milroe is as much of a wild card as any player, I think, in college football in the playoff era. Because like the highs and the guy was benched this year, the highs and the lows, how much they rely on his immense skill to bail them out. I don't think you can get a firm handle on it. If he's unbelievable Jalen Milroe, then probably game over. But I think this Michigan defense has a chance against it.
I would be very surprised if the story of this game ends up becoming Michigan just had too many defensive breakdowns. It just
I agree.
It would be so out of character for them, I think.
Opponent pass plays of 20 yards or more, Michigan has given up 22 this year. That's 3rd best in the country. Your own pass plays of 20 yards or more, Bama has 54 this year. That's tied for 11th in the Power 5. So again, Bama relies on that. Bama must make big plays. Bama they are not going to march down the field on Michigan repeatedly. That I will guarantee.
Yeah,
they are not going to have 3 touchdown drives of 12 plays or more. That is not going to happen. And we'll flip to the run game part of this, and that's part of why this is too. This is not a great Bama run game. Jace McClellan, who's their best back by far, got hurt in the Iron Bowl against Auburn, did not play in the SEC championship game when they had the arrival press conference at Disneyland on the 27th. Nick Saban was very optimistic and said he expects Jace McClellan to play. I think that's a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
If they have to go with Roydell Williams, I would bring Alabama's chances down like 10% because Jace McClellan is not a great back by Alabama standards, but I think he's clearly the best guy they have.
Yeah, I mean he makes guys miss just at a different rate than everyone else on the offense. He has 45 missed tackles forced this year, according to PFF, which is 15 more than the next closest person, which is Jalen Milroe. When it comes to running backs, that's 25 more than Roydell Williams is the next closest running back. It's just a different dynamic. He's not like a super prolific yards after contact guy, but he does bring that to the table. And if they don't have him, it's just hard for me to see a world where Alabama is super threatening running the ball. Like maybe they can maintain some level of efficiency without him, but I think you want to try to find a level of explosiveness if you can. And I don't know that they can do that if they don't have Chase McClellan. So yeah, it's a huge deal that seems like they're going to get him back.
And again, we're used to this. We're used to Bama having a great back. They don't have a great back. Mm-hmm. When you think about their playoff teams, yards per carry from the lead back, 2017, Damian Harris averaged 7.4 yards per carry that year. 2018, Damian Harris averaged 5.8. Najee Harris averaged 6.7. 2020, Najee Harris, 5.8. 2021, Brian Robinson, 5 yards per carry. 2016, Damian Harris, 7.2. 2015, Derrick Henry, 5.6. And they're getting the ball 50 times a game. This year, Jace McClellan, 4.8 yards per carry. Roydell Williams, 5.1 yards per carry. They're fine. Mm-hmm. They're fine. So they don't have a game breaker at receiver. Bon's good. They don't have a game breaker at running back. The game breaker is the quarterback. The offensive line, the guards are good. Right tackle J.C. Latham is good. Caden Proctor, left tackle, is getting better. It seems like the weakness is the center, but you can also watch that Georgia game, and there are times where the line of scrimmage is 5 yards down the field because those guards are pushing the line of scrimmage.
It was like Alabama has had offensive line questions all year, and it was quite bad at the beginning of the year. Like they couldn't handle Texas, they couldn't handle South Florida, and then something switched for them. And I don't know if it was just experience and getting more of a rhythm and chemistry up front or what. But like the SEC championship, I think was the best that offensive line has played all year, and part of that is probably a byproduct of Georgia not sending the house after Jalen Milroe and like playing spies and playing it somewhat conservatively, but I thought that Alabama's offensive line dominated that game, which I wasn't really sure if they were capable of. So, you don't love to see that if you're Michigan. So it's improved for sure. Like I think Tyler Booker is awesome, one of their guards, and I like J.C. Latham a lot. Caden Proctor, as you said earlier, has gotten much better this year. But I don't know. It's an interesting matchup, like strength on strength. I think with Alabama's guards against Michigan's defensive tackles.
Seth McLaughlin at center, I think, is a bit of a weak link, right, for Alabama. Mm-hmm. He has a PFF grade in the 60s. Everybody else, and then Caden Proctor's PFF grade is terrible because he was not good for the first 2/3 of the year. But Latham at right tackle, the two guards are good. But again, all right, so what's the moneymaker here? I think inside runs following those guards, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're facing the best collection of defensive tackles in the country with Michigan's top 3 defensive tackles. Again, this feels like an area where Michigan should be able to handle what Bama's going to try to do.
Yeah, it's one of the, for a lot of reasons, I'm bummed we weren't at either of these sites to ask the questions that we wanted to ask of people this week. But if I were at the Rose Bowl, I would want to talk with Michigan's offensive linemen about whether or not they view the interior of Michigan's defensive line as something they're more accustomed to seeing in the SEC. Like I think it is rare for a northern program, I think, to be as like big and athletic and deep at defensive tackle as Michigan is. Like geography just doesn't help you out there when you're trying to recruit players like that. But Michigan has done it with this group of tackles. So I did think, I thought there was a possibility that group would like sort of take over the Ohio State game because Ohio State's interior offensive line has been probably average this year, and I don't know that happened. So. I don't maybe want to overstate the impact of Michigan's defensive tackles, but I think throughout the year we've seen enough high-level play to know what the ceiling of that group is, and it certainly feels like to me that maybe it'll end up being a wash, but I do think that Michigan has the potential to like kind of win the game in that area if it can like use those guys to obviously control the run game but also like use some interior pressure to kind of push the pocket on Jalen Milroe and make him uncomfortable.
Mason Graham, Cam Good, Chris Jenkins, Kenneth Grant, all very good PFF grades against the run as those 4 interior tackles that they'll play most of the time. I like Michigan's spot here defensively. Michigan's given up only 87 rush yards a game. That's 6th best in the country. Bama, 47th in the nation, 173 rush yards per game. if you don't make mistakes, and Michigan won't, if you don't make mistakes, I think Bama could have a hard time scoring in this one. Do you think that Bama could get in a run of, 3 of the last 4 drives have been 3 and out?
Yeah, I do, because I think Alabama, I have it written down here, they're 54th in the country in first down rate, which is not I think you want to be better than that if you're in like an elite level offense. And that to me says like they're definitely capable of stringing together a couple of 3 and outs. And there's just not like, if there was what do they say? Find the fish in the secondary, like go get the guy that you can just attack repeatedly. If there was someone like that in the Michigan secondary, I guess I wouldn't feel as confident about it, but I don't think that there is. And I just don't think that Michigan's going to get like schemed out of position or like have like poor eye discipline and leave guys running free down the field. And that's what Jalen Milroe, I think, needs to be consistently successful. So I think like when you size up everything that Michigan or Alabama, has done on offense this year and everything Michigan has done on defense this year, actually it feels somewhat lopsided in Michigan's favor. Like there's the ultimate wild card, right, with Jalen Milroe, which we said it's just incredibly hard to predict what a game is going to look like from a guy who plays the way that Jalen Milroe plays, and it could look like the best game we've ever seen from a quarterback. Like he has that kind of ceiling, but if you're not going to like try to guess that that's going to happen and just sort of like take both of these this offense and this defense at face value, I think Michigan's in a much better spot.
I think you have to assume at least like 2 or 3 ridiculous Jalen Milroe plays. I think 2 or 3 Michigan can handle. I think Bama might need 6 from him, which is some combination of deep balls, plays where he held the ball for 8 seconds and then completed something down the field, and then just unbelievable runs. But again, it is much more in the scramble game than in the called run game. And again, even with assuming that Jace McClellan plays, you just got to key on him. Like, make the backs beat you. Make the backs get 5 and 6 yard chunks and move Alabama down the field. I do think this would be not that Georgia wasn't planning for Bama all year. Obviously they were. But Georgia also, gave Bama a short field, fumbling at the 10-yard line or whatever, because they tried to do a reverse in a bad spot. They had some blown coverages in that game. I just think even that, like, without some of the Georgia mistakes, whether the blown coverages and that turnover, Bama doesn't win that game. I don't think Michigan makes those mistakes. I just don't. So I think we have to keep in mind, God, we started this show at the right time. The South is not that good. The South, like, it's not like being the SEC champ. It's not like, whoa, they beat Georgia. Did you watch Georgia this year? Georgia was there for the taking all year, and then they sort of had to give it to Bama on a platter a little bit for Bama to take it. Bama easily could have lost another 2 or 3 games. Like, this is not dominance. In the end, like, should the SEC one-loss champ be in the playoff? Probably. But again, if you go back and watch tape, if you're a Florida State fan, you'd be ticked. Like, it's not like you wouldn't watch this and say, oh, well, you got to put Bama in. Why? Who offensively? There's one guy that scares you, and he's going to get the snap every play. So that's the thing. But again, he threw a touchdown pass against Georgia, and he had another huge touchdown pass against Georgia where he was 3 yards past the line of scrimmage. Yeah. And on the 3rd down before the 4th and 31, he had another play. He threw like a pass against Auburn where he ran past the line of scrimmage and then threw the ball. Again, like, this guy, they put a lot on him, and his highs are high, but he is not, this is not a guy who's just pinpoint with all the stuff. And the SEC championship game, it was like, oh, that guy's wide open. It's like, yes, it is. He is wide open, but you are literally 3 yards past the line of scrimmage. What are you doing? Right. So like that guy is in there. Yes. And I think Jesse Minter and Mike Sainristil and Chris Jenkins and Junior Colston and all these really solid veteran Michigan players can bring out the mistake-making Milroe, while also, I think, limiting the game-breaking Milroe.
I think that's right. Like, I was gonna talk about like the chess match between Jesse Minter and Tommy Rees, but it's not really that. That's not what this is. It's the chess match, I guess, between Jesse Minter and Jalen Milroe. Although I'm not exactly sure they're playing chess.
No, Jalen Milroe is playing dodgeball, man. I don't know.
He's definitely not playing chess. I do think there's been some like really concerning play, like decision making, and just sort of like, I can't believe you thought you could do that stuff from Jalen Milroe. But it makes him who he is. Like, it makes him exciting, makes him wildly unpredictable. But again, like, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse. It's hard for me to envision Michigan's defense being susceptible to that, or at least susceptible enough that it's going to be the reason they lose. Like you said, they're limiting it entirely is probably impossible. But if you can keep it to less than a handful of those kind of plays, which I think Michigan is certainly capable of, then I think Michigan feels good about that.
And just to be clear, this is 0% a criticism of Jalen Milroe. They put this on this guy as a first-year starter. This is a reminder that Alabama made the playoff by taking a first-year starter at quarterback and saying, save us.
Yeah.
And he did. He saved the offensive coordinator. He saved the head coach. He saved a bunch of average skill players. He saved an offensive line that took 2.5 months to grow into itself, and he got him here. But now you're asking him to do that against a very accomplished defense with a good plan. So I think there's reason to have questions about that. All right, when we come back, we're going to flip it. We're going to talk about the Michigan offense versus the Alabama defense, and we'll do that next on Kings of the North. And we are back on Kings of the North. So grateful that you are here. We have a YouTube channel, which is where we would direct you. If you have not subscribed to the Kings of the North YouTube channel, make sure you get subscribed. We have launched Landis, right? The podcast feed separately for Kings of the North is up and running. Yes,
it is up and running. You should be able to find it like anywhere you find podcasts at this point. I guess if you can't, like, drop us a note on Twitter or something, and we'll look into it. But yeah, it should be all good to go.
And I'm so fired up. Again, I've been limited in we haven't had as many shows as we planned, but this is again why people have vacations. This hasn't been a vacation for me, but when you're not knee deep in it every day and you start to miss it a little bit, and then you start to think about stuff, like, I am fired up for the new year. I cannot wait for what Kings of the North is going to grow into in 2024. So if you're new, thanks for being here. If you've been with us from the jump, we couldn't do it without you. And tell a friend, because, like, there's just nobody else doing it quite like we're doing it here. And the North has risen to the challenge that we have put down. We're doing a whole show about you, North. Make it worth it. And they have. All right, let's talk about the Michigan offense against the Alabama defense. And I will just ask you this question: could the Alabama defense just win this game and that's it?
Yep.
Okay. Well, that's why we did the other thing first. Because this is a Saban defense with dudes, right?
Yes, I not. Like, in certain spots, yes. Like, the secondary is excellent. We'll get into it more. Like, the ends are very good. Maybe not the same, like, interior defensive line that you're accustomed to seeing from Nick Saban's best defenses, but this defense is fast, man. Like, they're aggressive. They get after you. It's weird. It's like, diving in on some of the numbers, I was surprised it didn't quite add up. Like, I thought there would be more like top 10 rankings, but I think if you watch Alabama's defense, you get a feeling for how much they can just kind of swarm and overwhelm a team. Like, it does look like an Alabama defense. There have been times this year where I thought this was the best defense in the country. I still think that's up for debate if you include Michigan's defense in that conversation. But yeah, this is a defense that has dudes at all three levels, and a defense that I think is capable of winning this game.
Michigan's offense, again, just like we talked about the defense, efficient, right? Are there superstars all over the place? No, there are not. But when you look at the numbers, the efficiency numbers in the FEI ratings, which is, again, it's Brian Fremeau, we like those numbers, just kind of give some context. Fifth best offense, just getting the job done. Now, the Alabama defense, also top 10 in that, they're 9th. EPA, which is, again, just like how kind of you're doing play after play, 5th. for Michigan. Alabama, not quite as good, 21st. Michigan averaging almost 37 points a game. Bama giving up about 18 points a game. Like, can the efficiency of this Michigan offense show itself in a game like this when Bama does have game wreckers? Like, is that, do you question the ability of Michigan to do what it has basically done the entire year against the Big Ten and a lousy non-conference schedule?
Yeah, I do. And I just I question just sort of generally whether or not efficiency is the way to win in the college football playoff, because I'm not so sure it is. I think it's like mostly about big plays. How many can you get?
Okay.
How many can you limit? Which, you know, it doesn't necessarily work in Michigan's favor when we're talking about Michigan's offense.
So let's talk about the Michigan pass game first then. 219 passing yards per game for Michigan. That's 74th in the nation. Again, they don't chuck it around like crazy. Bama giving up 189 pass yards per game. That's 25th. JJ McCarthy hasn't had a 200-yard passing game since November 4th against Purdue. Again, they've been winning. They beat Penn State without throwing a pass in the second half. Like some of the Michiganiest ways of winning are like tip of the cap, because they had a whole bunch of stuff self-inflicted to deal with down the stretch. Didn't have their coach. But it's like, well, that's not going to work against Alabama. Nick, if you told Nick Saban, hey, man, just a heads up, Michigan, they're not going to throw a pass in the second half. It's like, okay, well, then they're going to average minus 2.6 yards per run, right?
Yeah.
So, like, Michigan is going to have to extend itself beyond that. But has that not been the story of this Michigan team? Third straight time in the playoff, you go from Cade McNamara to J.J. McCarthy as a first-year starter to J.J. McCarthy as a second-year starter. And I feel like this brings us back to what I think was the preseason discussion around Michigan and J.J. McCarthy, which is, if he's an elevator, can you ride him to the second floor? Because on the second floor is where the championship trophy is.
Yep.
Can he be an elevator, a playmaker, make a couple of those big plays in the pass game or scrambling in a game like this? Or will it be very difficult for him against a defense this good?
Yeah, and there were signs, like encouraging signs of him being an elevator, I think, really through the first 2/3 of the season. And then it's fair to point out that their schedule was backloaded. They ended up playing, I think, 3 of the best 4 defenses in the country in their last 4 games, or maybe it was in their last 3 games. But
Ohio State, Iowa, Penn State, you're talking about?
Penn State, yeah. I think those are, I think those 3 in Michigan are the best, or the top 4 statistical defenses in the country. So like that's a tough task, and like the level of competition did ramp up, but everything that was encouraging about the early play from JJ McCarthy, at least in my mind, got kind of wiped away almost entirely by Michigan sort of like not needing him to win at least 2 of those games. He was okay against Ohio State, but he threw 8 passes against Penn State. He didn't need to do anything spectacular against Iowa in the Big Ten championship, and wasn't particularly good in that game. They were sort of winning, in spite of some erratic play from JJ, I think. So it was, I don't know, like, do you consider it regression, or is that just like what we saw from him early on was a little bit of fool's gold because they weren't playing anybody that good?
I think it is another complicated read, because I do think you have to factor in the Jim Harbaugh suspension into this, and that like he and Jim Harbaugh have a relationship. Sharon Moore, as the offensive coordinator, also has to be the head coach for the last 3 games of the regular season, and they're just trying to survive. As the competition got tougher, they were without their head coach, and so it's survival mode. I think he can elevate in this game. Like I think when you look at the Purdue game. So again, he the last 4 games of, the last 3 of the regular season, the Big Ten championship game, 60 passing yards, 141, 148, 147. Prior to that, 24 of 37 for 335 yards against Purdue, 21 of 27 for 287 against Michigan State. Like, I don't think he's going to drop 335 and pretend that Alabama is Purdue, but I don't think that was only lousy competition. And I don't think the statistical regression in the pass game was only better competition. I think there were some other things at play, and with a month to prepare, Harbaugh back in the saddle, Sharon Moore not having to do everything, JJ having a month to get fully healthy, which is everybody did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Can he be good? Can he be good enough? I think he could. He also made some terrible turnovers in the playoff semifinal a year ago, or they would have made the national title game.
Yeah, I just like he's gonna have to make some like tight window throws in this game.
Yes,
like I like Kool-Aid McKinstry and Terry and Arnold, Alabama's corners, might be the two best corners in the country. They're excellent. And Michigan's just not dynamic at receiver. So whatever I think Michigan accomplishes in the passing game is just not going to come easily. Which I think puts like a premium on JJ using his legs in this game. Like he's a really good athlete. Like I don't know if people who don't watch Michigan football week after week like understand how good of an athlete JJ McCarthy is, but if we're going to talk about the X factor of Jalen Milroe's scrambling ability, then I think we probably need to do the same for JJ. Now there's, I guess, a layer to that I think he was pretty clearly hurt from the Penn State game on. It did seem like his mobility was limited somewhat. Now he's had a month or so to recover from that, and I would assume if he's not 100% would at least be in a better state than he was in the last few games of the regular season. But like I think he has to run in this game. I think he has to not necessarily design runs, but like scramble and make plays with his legs, and not make everything in the passing game be about, can I complete a tight window slant while Roman Wilson's fighting for his life to try to get open against Terry and Arnold.
Yeah, I like they have to. I feel like they have played at times with like a governor on him, that like they just, because he has that crazy guy instinct, and like they've been able to win without it. So I think they haven't asked him to do it. And some of the times this year when he did it the most, he had 3 turnovers against Bowling Green because he probably had to try to do too much. He only has 145 scramble yards this year, which is just not a ton. According to PFF, he's only had 16 scrambles this season. Again, that's compared to 50 for Jalen Milroe. But I think, again, a decent chunk of that is what they have told him and asked him to do. So if you were Michigan, like, do you unleash him in this game?
I think you have to. Like it's imperative. I think that he gets unleashed in this game. And it's hard, right? Because you're right. He does have that trait where if you like take the governor off, you're not quite sure what you're going to get. Like
it might go drive off a cliff.
Yeah, it could be
not a cliff, more like the golf cart when the guy like jumps the golf cart over out of the bunker and lands in the sand and flips the cart. Not that you die, but that you break your wrist when the golf cart.
You just get banged up a little bit. Yeah. So it's on one hand that's like a little terrifying, but also like there's a part of me that thinks Jim Harbaugh likes that and wants that, right? Like it's not Cade McNamara wasn't going to do that. I think part of the reason Jim Harbaugh figured that JJ McCarthy was the right quarterback to lead this team last year is because that element existed. And he did make some plays like that against TCU in the playoff game last year. He had like back-breaking mistakes that sort of negated them, and he can't do that in this game. But I think the gunslinger kind of crazy person trait that definitely exists within JJ McCarthy is something that Jim Harbaugh is not necessarily afraid to embrace on a stage like this. And I do think that Michigan will absolutely need it if it wants to win this game.
And we've talked about this a lot over the years, like the team that you are and have to be to get through the regular season in a conference like the Big Ten, where you are going to play a lot of really good defenses, where you're not going to play that many high-flying offenses, where if you can be, tough and physical and play good defense and not make mistakes, more often than not, that'll get you through. But then you can't be that when you get to the playoff. And so JJ McCarthy, like rip off the Band-Aid JJ McCarthy, like, who you might want to see, like the JJ McCarthy that beat Ohio State in 2022, right? Where it wasn't very consistent, made 4 huge plays.
Yeah.
Right. That basically was the entire passing offense was 4 huge plays, but that was enough. That was all you needed. And so like that kind of example, I think What you wouldn't want to do, and this is why they did it, what you wouldn't want to do is go into this game with a quarterback who was incapable of this.
Mhm.
If you've decided that you want to limit him, at least it's a decision. But if you give him the opportunity, you think he can do it. I think you have to have that kind of guy against this kind of quality of defense. So I think I agree with you. You got to let him try.
You gotta let him try, and like he's gonna have to do it because I'm not super confident in Michigan's ability to consistently block Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell. There's gonna be dudes in the backfield in this game. And JJ's gonna if JJ thinks he's gonna stand back there and throw it down the field, I don't think that's going to happen. I think a lot of what he does is going to have to kind of come on the edges and on boots or play action or scrambles and extended plays or whatever. For both quarterbacks, I don't think either one of them wants to be in a position where they're trying to routinely complete pocket passes because I don't think that suits Jalen Milroe's skill sets, and I just don't think that's going to be JJ McCarthy's existence in this game because I don't love the matchup on tackles on ends for Michigan.
I also don't know that you have to do that. You don't have to let him loose from the first snap because maybe Jalen Milroe throws a pick six to Mike Sainer still in the second series. Now Michigan's up 7-0, and now you can tighten it up a little bit, try to get a field goal drive, get up 2 scores. But then if you get in a situation where it's a close game, you're down a touchdown in the third quarter, and now you've got to let JJ be JJ a little bit. I think Harbaugh can play the context of the game a little bit here and what he lets JJ McCarthy do.
Yeah, I think so. It'll be like I don't know there's a game state kind of game for Alabama. Alabama is just it's like a randomness to it that I think that for their success. And yeah, there is a very specific type of game that I think Michigan could try to get this to that would suit it much better than Alabama.
I'm sure this will come up when we talk about the Michigan run game, but in terms of, you've touched on it, in terms of the pass game, the Zach Zinter injury for Michigan is huge. Best guard in the country, out for the year. They've had tackle trouble at times. Mm-hmm. Do you think Michigan will up front have a hard time pass protecting against Alabama?
I do. The most glaring example of it for Michigan was the Penn State game when Carson Barnhart just couldn't block Chop Robinson for the first few snaps, so they decided they just weren't going to throw the ball for the rest of that game. Now Carson Barnhart is the one playing right guard for Zach Zinter. Trente Jones now comes in and he plays right tackle for Michigan. And we've talked about this all year, Michigan has felt like it has 7 NFL offensive linemen, so they're fortunate to have that kind of depth there. It's not like they're going to throw a turnstile out there at right tackle, a guy who's not ready for the moment. Trente Jones has played a lot of football, but I just don't think they're dynamic at that position, at the tackle position. They've certainly been better. This is generally on the offensive line. This is far from the best that Michigan has had under Jim Harbaugh. I think it's a definite step back from I think their last 2 playoff teams. But it's an okay offensive line. But the weak point I do think is those tackles, and that's not a great spot to be in when you're going up against the dynamic pass rushers that Alabama has.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about the Michigan run game, which obviously is their bread and butter, and again, has not been as dynamic this season as in years past, but they still have 2 dudes, Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. They still are going to do this. 162 rush yards per game for Michigan, not a ton, 61st in the nation. Alabama gives up 125 per game, which is 31st in the country. Blake Corum, over 1,000 yards, touchdown machine, 24 touchdowns this year, only 4.7 yards per carry. I think everybody acknowledges, feels like he's lost a little bit of explosiveness from last year, the knee injury last season. Do you think Michigan can run the ball? Because Michigan, again, I don't think Alabama is going to put together 3 12 play drives, but Michigan wants to. Can they?
I'm a little skeptical. I don't know. They've been fairly efficient, but still they're not. This run game is, and I guess it's a product of what I just said about the offensive line not being very good, or not that it's not very good, but being not as good as Michigan has had. And like Donovan Edwards has had a really weird year where he's just like been largely ineffective for long stretches, and Blake Corum's not himself. So all that adds up to this Michigan run game. I just think not being overly impressive. It's if people have not watched Michigan this year and going to like tune in for the first time and are expecting the team that just tries to bully its way up and down the field, this is not really that Michigan team. Like there have been moments certainly when they've done it. They did it kind of in the second half a little bit against Penn State. They did it on a crucial drive against Ohio State at the end of that game, but that drive wasn't indicative of how the entire game went. So they can channel it when they need to. I just don't know if I see them channeling it for the entirety of this game or even a significant portion of this game. And it's not that Alabama's run defense is like overwhelming, although I do think like Tim Keenan in the middle of Alabama's defensive line is like a big old dude at like 320 pounds. And if you don't have a Zach Zinter, like, can you move that guy the way you need to move him to run the ball effectively? I don't know the answer to that question, but I would think it's probably not. So I don't think the run game is what gets this done for Michigan. Maybe it's a thing to help you stay on schedule, to stay in some third and shorts so that Nick Saban doesn't get into his third down packages. But I don't think it is the recipe for a win here if you're going to try to ride the run game.
So let's play a game. Who is the most dynamic player on Michigan's offense? So I guess we're talking about Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson at receiver, right? We love Colston Loveland at tight end. Think he's a great player. We're talking about Blake Corum. We're talking about Donovan Edwards. We're talking about JJ McCarthy. Who do you think is like get the ball in his hands and has the chance to be the most dangerous in a game like this?
I mean, based off how the season has gone, I would say JJ, but I definitely think that Donovan Edwards has the potential.
Yes, it is Donovan Edwards. It's got to be Donovan Edwards.
It's in there. Yeah, it's definitely in there.
I love Donovan Edwards. It's inexplicable to me. I don't understand this season. Do you want to guess how many runs of 20 yards or more Donovan Edwards has this year?
Two.
Blake Corum has 7. I'm just looking at the Big Ten numbers. Tyrone Tracy led the Big Ten. He had 10. Trayvon Henderson at Purdue. Trayvon Henderson had 9 for Ohio State. Braylon Allen had 8. Blake Corum had 7. Donovan Edwards has 2. He had 7 runs of 10 yards or more. It's wild to me, man. He had 10 runs of 20 yards or more last year. He has 2 this year. But I feel like in this situation, I'd be throwing him screen passes. I would be hitting him like with little draws, like just not that it's a long con. Not they were like, hey, Donovan, don't be good. Throw off Saban. But I feel like this could be the Donovan Edwards. Donovan Edwards saved Michigan against Ohio State last season when Blake Corum was hurt and he ran for 200 plus yards carrying the ball in his wrong hand. I feel like this could be the guy that breaks off the 2 or 3 plays that gets Michigan over the hump.
Yeah,
even though there's no evidence of that.
There's no evidence. Well, but we saw it last year, right? He had 19 10 plus yard runs last year. He has 7 this year. Like he's definitely an explosive player who just it's kind of befuddling that he hasn't been able to do it this year. I honestly, maybe I don't know if he's hurt. I haven't seen really people talk or write about it all that much, why he's been so effective, but he didn't lose his athleticism, I'm assuming. Yeah. So I think there's definitely a world where that happens. And I know we're talking about rushing offense versus rushing defense here, but I do think if that happens, it probably is more in the passing game. It's like throwing the ball to if you're Michigan and you're going to target the running backs in the passing game, how's Alabama going to handle that? And it's not like right. Alabama has good linebackers, but I think for most linebackers, it's hard to cover a running back, especially one who's as dynamic as Donovan Edwards, who at times last year looked like a slot receiver. So that is an interesting layer, I guess, of this game that has not really hit for Michigan at all this year. But I do feel like when we watch these bowl games, sometimes when teams have a month to prepare, they'll go out there and they'll just do something, and we think this where the heck did this come from? And I think that could be Donovan Edwards as like a playmaker on the edge and a playmaker as a receiver out of the backfield.
I think Michigan is very good at coming up with trick plays for big games, and I expect them to do that here. And I do think if we're going to take the coordinators, so you could either take Sharon Moore, the offensive coordinator for Michigan, and Jesse Minter, the defensive coordinator for Michigan, or you could take Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator for Alabama, or Kevin Steele, the defensive coordinator for Alabama, who's like a recycled guy. I think it's his third stop at Alabama. Which coordinators would you take?
Oh, I take Michigan's.
Like, I don't think I think there's belief in Jesse Minter coming up with some kind of game plan to contain Jalen Milroe. And I think there is belief in Sharon Moore coming up with some kind of game plan to get a couple guys free at big moments to make the handful of explosive plays that I think you are exactly right when you said in a game like this in the playoff, it's great that Michigan's consistent, but that's not going to be enough. They're going to have to make a couple big plays, but I think Sharon Moore can help make that happen.
Sharon Moore, who like is released from the burden of not having to be the team's head coach and offensive coordinator. Yeah, no, I think he probably did a pretty large exhale when Jim Harbaugh came back, and knowing that Jim Harbaugh was going to be on the sidelines, or I guess he was back for the Big Ten championship game, right? So, I think you're right. I think like. Who's going to make the most of their time in the lab among the coordinators? I think that answer is absolutely Michigan.
Okay. So in the end, you like Michigan's chances to kind of do what it needs to do offensively, or you think it potentially will be very difficult for Michigan?
My lean is that it's difficult only because I think there are things that Michigan is capable of that would make me feel better. I just don't know. I haven't seen enough of it, or like really any of it, like when we're talking about Donovan Edwards, to make me confident that it's going to happen. So like I think it's there if Michigan can find it in this game, but based off what we've seen so far, I lean more towards it being a challenge for them.
Okay. Two famous guys in charge, Jim Harbaugh versus Nick Saban. We will wrap up our discussion and make our picks for the Rose Bowl after this on Kings of the North. All right, we need to talk about the coaches in this game before we make our picks. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. Nick Saban lives in this world.
Mm-hmm.
He is 23-10 against top 5 teams at Alabama. I don't know what he was at Michigan State. I know he beat Ohio State in 1998. We know that. But that's just Alabama. So 23-10, he's just used to this. Jim Harbaugh, the only 2 top 5 wins he has in his tenure at Michigan are the last 2 Ohio State games. So he is 2-5 against top 5 teams. Again, 23-10. I want to ask you this though, Bill. Do you know what Jim Harbaugh's playoff record in the NFL is? Do you know that? Top of your head, you want to guess? Niners?
No, I mean over 500, I would guess.
Yeah,
but I don't
5
know.
and 3, 5 and 3. So pretty good, right? So so pretty good at this. And again, you can't compare, right? Saban is 206-28 at Alabama. Harbaugh is 87-25. So Harbaugh would have to go 119-3 to catch up to Saban. So that's not what we're talking about here. But the last 3 years, Michigan's 38-3 and Alabama's 36-5. This is what Michigan is now. Do you think Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time? Can Jim Harbaugh coach with Saban in this game, Bill? Can he schematically, motivationally, in-game decisions be as good as the best?
Yeah, I don't know. I think I would say maybe come up just short of that. I don't know what to make of the fact that Jim Harbaugh has been terrible in bowl games. And the other bowls that are non-playoffs probably shouldn't be part of this conversation. Like he's 2-7 in college as a college football coach in bowl games. He's 0-6 in his last 6 bowl games, and obviously he's lost in the playoffs the last two years he's been there. And it's hard for me to fathom Nick Saban ever doing anything like that. So I don't think that Harbaugh is close to being Saban's equal, or not even that, finding that level of coaching acumen for even a day against Nick Saban. I don't know. I think Jim Harbaugh probably leaves a little something to be desired in that regard.
The TCU loss in the semifinal last year is tough. It's hard you can't wipe it away because, the Georgia loss in the semifinal 2 years ago, it's like, okay, this is Michigan, the big hurdle there was beating Ohio State and winning the Big Ten and getting in the playoff. And it's like, okay, they're just not ready to compete with Georgia yet. But they were in this exact spot a year ago against a team that they were more talented than, and they just blew it. And there were some things that, went against them and some goofy things that happened in that game. Like, does that matter at all in this evaluation? Or is that just like a weird one-off of like, man, I don't know. Sometimes it gets away from you.
No, it matters to me because, like, it's not like they got there the first year. They played a Georgia team that was much better than them. You're experiencing that stage for the first time. Like, you're kind of figuring out what it's all about, and you have a really tough matchup. Like, it's understandable that you would lose. I'm not saying it's acceptable, but it's understandable. You get back, you're the better team. All the intangible stuff shouldn't be an issue because you've been there now. You've had this build throughout the entire season where you're like been trying to prove that you're the best team in the country, that the display you put out there against Georgia the year before was not indicative of what your program is or wants to be. And then you just like lay an egg against a TCU team that got butt kicked in the national championship game. So no, that is a factor for me. You have to find a way to get your team to play its best football when you're in the postseason. And Jim Harbaugh has not done that the 2 times he's been there the last 2 years. And if you are to include the rest of the bowl results, he hasn't done that after the regular season has ended, or really any of the teams he's coached in college football. So until he does it, I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt, especially against Nick Saban.
What do we make of the Ohio State game then? Right, they get outgained in the Ohio State game. Jim Harbaugh's not there, but they come up. They have Ohio State has 2 killer turnovers. Michigan has none. Michigan, is a little more bold, has the trick plays. Like Michigan does what needs to be done against probably a more talented Ohio State team. And again, I think depending how you want to look at it, at least certainly in some aspects, we already talked about like skill position, like Ohio State's better than Bama in some aspects of the game. And Michigan found a way in that game. Is that something to say, hey, that was a find a way game? They could have a find a way game against Alabama.
I suppose it could be. My view on that more is like Ryan Day coached super tight and Jim Harbaugh didn't, and like Nick Saban's not going to do that. So I don't even know if it's fair to compare the two. But I don't want to like take away Michigan beating top 10 Ohio State teams at the last 2 years or last 3 years. So yeah, I think you can carry over some of it, like the willingness to like kind of be bold in a game like that and do the trick plays and like not shrink in the moment. I think does matter, but I don't think the guy on the other sideline is going to shrink in the moment either. So like maybe it's a wash.
All right, let's make our picks. I really feel like this is a true toss-up game. The line tells you that, and I would have a hard time understanding somebody who is like, I've got this. I absolutely know what's going to happen in this game, and it's primarily because of Jalen Milroe. And I just don't know if he's going to just look like the best player in the country and blow the game open, or if Michigan is going to make it very difficult on him. And then as a result, Alabama's like going to not be able to move the ball at all. I think both are on the table, but I also kind of think this is like a last drive kind of game. I absolutely think it's a game into the fourth quarter, and it could come down very much, I think, to which is just great. We saw like the Georgia Ohio State semifinal a year ago. Comes down to a kick at the end of the game. I think we're in that kind of range for how close this game might go. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that, but not close and like back and forth, but like not super, like not high scoring. Like I think it's going to get a little punty in this game, kind of in the middle. But yes, I am with you that I think it's going to come down to the last drive, and not necessarily like who has the ball last is going to score, but I think someone could have the ball with a chance to win the game, like in the last minute. Yeah.
So the over-under is 44.5. I did take into account, and Austin Ward always reminds us of this, like good defense can mean points sometimes. So my instinct was maybe on the under, but then I thought, well, I think both quarterbacks are capable of throwing a pick six in this.
Mhm.
And I do think at the very least, even if there aren't defensive scores, I could see multiple possessions where there are short fields created by the defense. So then that led me to go over 44.5. And I think it's tight, but I do have Michigan winning this game. Again, I would not bet my house on this, but I do think Michigan's strength defensively, limit the explosive plays, and have enough grinded out drives. I have Michigan 26-24, which is 4 field goals for Michigan. And like I see kind of like a lot of that if they only score 2 touchdowns, maybe one of them is set up by the defense, maybe one of them is a trick play that leads to something. And the rest of the time, like they're not quite as efficient offensively because Alabama stops them, but they're efficient enough to get some 45-yard drives that lead to long field goals. They have a good kicker. Mm-hmm. And then Alabama has a couple big plays. Maybe their 3 touchdowns are big plays, but like it's not quite enough. They don't have 6 big plays. Michigan 26, Alabama 24. But if you asked me 5 minutes from now, I might pick Alabama.
Yeah, I think you and I are of the same mind here. Like I could definitely see it kind of playing out the way you just described. I could see it in my mind. I think it's a similar kind of game. I'm picking Alabama to win by a point, 28-27. But I think it's tight. The way I'm envisioning it, like kind of ending, and like, is it worth predicting that? I don't know. But I kind of think like Michigan's going to have the ball at the end of the game with a chance to win it, and that is when like Dallas Turner and Chris Braswell are going to show up, and like it was like a little just not enough there for Michigan to overcome, I think, some deficiencies on its offensive line when it comes to protecting JJ McCarthy. But like I got a couple field goals in there for Michigan for sure. I think there probably is a defensive score in this game. And I certainly wouldn't be surprised if it's Michigan that ends up getting that defensive touchdown. I just don't know, like, as we've said, a few times, this is not Nick Saban's best team. This is probably not even close to Nick Saban's best team. But it probably is playing its best football going into this game, or closer to its best version than Michigan, I think is at the moment. And Michigan is complete now. Like Jim Harbaugh's back, and maybe that helps them find a better level than what we saw from them in the last couple of games, especially on offense. But just like the lack of explosion and there's like general kind of clunkiness I feel like I've seen from Michigan's offense, and we're talking the regular season ended almost a month ago, but those last handful of games, I just didn't think it was very good. It didn't inspire a ton of confidence in me that they were going to be able to go out there and score enough to beat Alabama. I don't think Alabama's going to run it up on them. I think it is a handful of big plays that leads to 4 touchdowns or 3, maybe it's 3 touchdowns and a defensive score for Alabama. But I think the explosive potential of Alabama is something that I would prefer to fall back on when trying to pick a game that I agree with you is going to be very tight. So I'll pick Alabama by a point.
All right. So, an hour of talk to be like, hey, anything could happen. So, but again, I just, I don't know. The thing I would push back against the hardest would be anybody who's like, oh, Bama SEC. Oh, Bama SEC, Bama SEC. Mm-hmm. Recruiting, talent, Bama SEC. It's like, I don't think that's it. I think that's actually like wrong.
Yes.
That, and at times the analysis in the playoff hasn't had to be much more complicated than that, but that's not what this is this year. So
no,
if you hear that elsewhere though, please tell us. And we will talk about it in the dog mentality segment of Kings of the North, which we really would like to make a permanent segment here. As on occasion, we will tell the South to cram it. Okay, when we do this again, we will come back with a Texas-Washington preview. I actually have perhaps significantly stronger feelings about that game and how I think that's going to go than I do about this game.
Yeah.
But I also need to finish my scouting on that and see if the last bits of that changed my mind at all. But we will do that next. And then we will plan on coming back on January 2nd and to break down everything that happened in the 2 semifinals. So again, you can find us on our new podcast feed. You can find us on YouTube. And just bottom line is just so awesome that you're here. So for our producer, Mike Urostowski, makes us sound good and look good. He's Bill Landis in Texas. I'm Doug Lesmerises in Ohio. And that was Kings of the North.